What's up, everyone? I'm here with my NFL Week 2 DraftKings picks. Hope all of you had a good Week 1. Before we get to this week's picks, let's go ahead and take a look back at last week's picks. First off, I'm going to go ahead and jump on my computer really quickly and show you something cool, and then we'll take a quick peek at my cash game lineup. Okay, so I just wanted to show you guys this really quickly. So first off, congratulations to Bears fan 24/7 for winning the Millionaire Maker this past week. But if we take a look at the winning Millionaire Maker lineup, you can actually see it up here as well. Every single one of these picks, except for Tariq Cohen, I talked about in one of my 2 videos last week. So that is a really, really cool thing to know that, I was obviously on the right track there. Hopefully my picks helped you. Honestly, if I would have played 150 entries, I probably would have had a lineup very close to this in one of them. Anyway, congrats again, Bears fan. And hopefully, we can continue to have very close lineups to the Millionaire Maker winner, and hopefully one time it'll be one of us. That would be awesome. So that was just something that I really wanted to show you. I thought was pretty cool. Also, here's my cash game lineup. This is something that I've been asked about quite a bit so far this season and some last season. So this will be something that I'll do every single Wednesday video now as well, and kind of just show this off really quickly. I mentioned that I didn't think that you needed to play Antonio Brown in cash. I never thought you needed to play him because I didn't think anybody could really get there and still have David Johnson or Le'Veon Bell. I figured out kind of this combination here, and I decided to go that route. The real big thing that I messed up on here is I was gonna play Robbie Anderson at my wide receiver role instead of there for Kendall Wright, and I was the big bump I would have had was I actually had the Rams defense in for a while, but I really wanted to play the Texans defense. Obviously, I wasn't right about that, so a little bit disappointing there, but all in all, I cashed in every single one of my cash game contests this week, so can't complain, and I'm definitely pretty pleased with that lineup. So hopefully we can repeat that again this week. All right, so that's going to do it for the recap. Let's go ahead and get to this week's picks. So we're moving into some stacks now, and I'm taking a little bit of a cop out here because I'm going to be throwing up 2 stacks at the same exact time, and neither of them are actually complete. But I really just want to talk about this Green Bay and Atlanta game because this is going to be a monster fantasy game, okay? And if you can hit every pick just right, you're gonna win a lot of money this week, because I don't see any way how this is not going to be a high scoring game. So right now this has the second highest total on the board. Last I looked, it was at like 53.5 or something like that. But the big reason I prefer this game over the Patriots and Saints game is because, yes, this Patriots Saints has a huge total right now as well. I believe it's like 55.5, like just an absolute monster of a total. But I feel like that's going to be a much tougher fantasy game to nail. Like on the Patriots side of the ball, there's nothing that's guaranteed in terms of workload. On the Saints side, yes, Drew Brees is going to be at home. That's a plus, but there's still some players that I have some questions about on the Saints. So honestly, I'm not too crazy about that game fantasy-wise. I feel like it is going to be high scoring, but I feel like that fantasy game is a little bit more risky. Now, in terms of this Green Bay and Atlanta game, we're talking about 2 of the worst fantasy defenses in the NFL over the past season. They're bottom 2 in quarterbacks, fantasy points allowed, and wide receiver points allowed. And the running back side of things, Green Bay is actually pretty average, but, we have Atlanta here still being in the bottom 5 there as well. So, and even Green Bay is still in the lower tier half of the league. They're still, they're actually below average, but, still nowhere near as bad as Atlanta. So, honestly, there's so many different stacks you could go with. If I had to build a lineup with Rodgers and Matt Ryan, separate lineups with each of them in there right now, the stack that I would go with for Matt Ryan would be Julio Jones. Obviously, that's a pretty safe stack. I struggle with picking the 2-headed monster at the running back position for the Falcons. I struggle with that. I think Freeman's definitely the safer option, but Coleman seems to get more targets these days. So I just don't know what to go with that. I definitely think that you could play both of them in the same lineup. I've had people ask me that before. So as far as the Packers go, you have a lot of options there as well, but if I had to pick one player right now, it'd actually be Randall Cobb. I don't want to pay up for Jordy Nelson. The Falcons do have Desmond Trufant back, which they did not have him the last time these 2 teams met up, which was in the NFC Championship game when the Falcons dropped 44 points on them, I believe it was, and the Packers scored 21. And even if he is shadowed by Trufant, it's not to say that he still can't have a big game. So, playing Jordy Nelson is still probable, but I probably wouldn't go that route. And then we have Randall Cobb, which is the reason I want to play Cobb is because he's kind of sandwich priced. I believe Cobb is $5,900, and then we have Devontae Adams, who's $5,800. So even though it's $100 cheaper, I feel like some people will go Adams over Cobb because they think that Adams has a little bit more big play potential. And, I think that'll help the ownership even more for Randall Cobb, because people are going to say, oh, if I'm going to play, pay $6K for, a wide receiver, I might as well go up and pay for Jordy Nelson. So I definitely think that's going to help Cobb's ownership, hopefully, and I definitely think he's a pretty good play. Okay, so for my third and final stack, I'm keeping it pretty simple here. I'm going to be going with Derek Carr and Michael Crabtree. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I mean, this should be pretty obvious. They're facing the New York Jets at home, coming off of a win against Tennessee. Everything's looking pretty promising for this team. One thing I do want to point out really quickly that looked very promising for Amari Cooper. I deliberately talked about it in my last week video when I was talking about Michael Crabtree then as well. Amari Cooper had not been getting involved very much in the red zone passing game, and it was pretty blatant that the Raiders were deliberately trying to get the ball to Amari Cooper in the red zone. So right now, I don't think it hurts Michael Crabtree too much. But if that continues to be a trend, then it's going to be a little bit tougher to predict who's going to get some of that market share there. But right now, I still think that there's more plays drawn up for Michael Crabtree in the red zone, and I suspect that he's still going to get some looks. He didn't have a bad game last week by any means. It wasn't a killer game, but at 6K, we couldn't complain too much. At 7.1K, we're going to need a little bit more out of him this week, but I think we're going to get it given that he has such a good matchup. Okay, so finally moving into some running backs now. First up, I have Kareem Hunt. And can you blame me for hopping on the bandwagon after the historic game he dropped on the Patriots opening night? So he put up 49 DraftKings points, I believe it was, on just 22 touches. He had 17 carries and 5 receptions, I believe it was. If you could guarantee me 20-plus touches from this guy every single week, I would play him. I do wish he was closer to the 6K mark than he was a 7K, but at 6.8, I don't think it's an incredibly unfair price. The one thing I do want to point out here is that he is facing the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Eagles last season were actually pretty stout against the run. They were in the top tier in terms of fantasy points allowed to the running back. The real thing that the Eagles struggled with, though, was their secondary. The Eagles were bottom 10 in just about every single fantasy wide receiver stat you can imagine in terms of receiving yards, receptions, receiving touchdowns allowed, so in fantasy points, of course. So as a whole, I feel like, the Chiefs are going to be able to move the ball successfully, even if it's not necessarily with Kareem Hunt on the ground. And because of that, I feel like Kareem Hunt's touchdown percentage, probability is significantly higher because of that, even though he may not move the ball that well on the ground. If they get, into a goal line situation, he's only going to need a couple yards or so for a touchdown, right? So I feel like his probability for a touchdown is very, very high in this game, and because of that, I think Kareem Hunt is worth the 6.8K. I'm definitely still going to hold out before I say I'm going to commit to him in my cash game lineup. I definitely don't think I'm going to be playing him too much in GPPs because I just don't know if I see that much potential for another 30-point game in back-to-back weeks. I feel like Tyreek Hill definitely has some potential for that, but I don't know if we're going to see Kareem Hunt have, a monstrous game again, but I definitely think a 20-plus point performance is definitely in the realm of possibility, and right now he's definitely high on the list of one of my cash game running backs. All right, so next up I have Ty Montgomery, and this is probably the best play on the board this week, people. I mean, honestly, this is the best matchup Ty Montgomery will have all season. Like, it just is, because Atlanta is that bad against the receiving running back, and obviously that's exactly what Montgomery is. Atlanta has allowed the second most receptions in the NFL. They allowed the most targets, they allowed the most receiving yards, and the most receiving touchdowns to running backs in the NFL. And last week was no different. They got lit up by the Bears' backup running back, Tariq Cohen. So this is just something in the Falcons scheme that really hurts them against the receiving running back. And obviously Montgomery has always been utilized in that fashion. So this is a great play for Montgomery. 5,800, he should be a lock in your cash game lineup in my opinion, and you should play him in some GPPs too, because he has the potential to have a really, really big game here as the numbers are pointing in that direction. All right, so rounding out our running backs here, we have Travoris Allen, aka Buck Allen. And honestly, it's tough to say whether this guy is actually a reasonable play in cash games or not. Obviously, I don't think even Allen himself could have foreseen him actually getting the most snaps out of any Ravens running back against the Bengals in week 1. The other weird thing is this dude actually had more rushing attempts and rushing yards in this one game in week 1 in 2017 than he did all of 2016. He played 8 games in 2016. He only had 9 rushing attempts for 34 yards and 3 receptions. And in week 1, he had 21 rushes for 71 yards. Not a spectacular stat line of only 3.4 yards per carry. But, I think it's safe to say he's not going to get the most carries week in and week out. But that's not really where the value is in this guy. It's in the passing game. If he's going to be utilized the same way that Danny Woodhead was, like if we could guarantee that he was going to get the same exact workload and be utilized the same exact formations and situations that Woodhead would be, then I'd be very interested in Allen. And I just haven't heard John Harbaugh, guarantee that. So for me, it's a little bit worrisome. One thing that also worries me is, like I said, in 2016, he only had 3 receptions. Now, it does help me a little bit to know that in 2015, he's not completely new to being utilized in the receiving game, because in 2015, he did have 45 receptions for 353 yards. He averaged 22 receiving yards a game. Did have 1 game of over 100 receiving yards and did have 2 receiving touchdowns. So he's not a complete, new guy to being utilized out of the backfield, but I don't have a warm and fuzzy feeling about him currently. So I'm going to continue to monitor the situation. If, he just ends up, coming out and saying that, he's going to be utilized heavily, Harbaugh does, then yes, I have a lot of interest in him. But until we know his specific workload, he's a really, really hard player to project. So right now I'm kind of on the fence, but I've had a lot of people ask me about him already. So I decided to go ahead and cover this guy as my 3rd running back. All right, so our first wide receiver up is Doug Baldwin. And yes, I know I talked about him last week. Hopefully you were following me on Twitter, because I tweeted out that I just could not bring myself to play him. In fact, I ended up fading that Packers and Seattle game in cash games entirely. I just couldn't bring myself to play anybody. No one really made a ton of sense to me in cash games, and I just really didn't have a lot of confidence in it. I thought that game was very high on the game total for Vegas anyway, so I was definitely very fortunate in that regard, because that game definitely ended up being a pretty big disappointment in terms of fantasy production. But Doug Baldwin is a great play this week. First off, he's coming off of that rough game, okay? So he only had like 4 or 5 targets. I think actually Paul Richardson actually had the most targets on the Seahawks. I suspect that's going to change immensely. I think Baldwin is a pretty much a sure thing for 7 to 8 targets in this game. They're going to be back home facing the 49ers, coming off of a loss. Right now, Baldwin's projections are through the roof. If you take a look at Baldwin, he's projecting at 19.6 points currently. If you take a look at some of the guys he's around in that projection, Antonio Brown's only got a couple more points on him. Julio Jones is only just over a point. Odell Beckham's actually beneath him. Michael Thomas, A.J. Green, Amari Cooper. These are all guys who are significantly more expensive than him. So I think Baldwin is a great cash game play this week. I also like it because I expect Baldwin to get a lot more targets this week. I expect the Seahawks as a whole to make big adjustments to their offense, because obviously their offensive line is lackluster. That's something they struggled with the past few years. So I expect this offense to start calling a lot of quick, out routes, screens, drag routes, slants, whatever they got to do to get the ball into Doug Baldwin's hands and get the ball out of Russell Wilson's hands as quick as possible, because even though Russell Wilson is probably one of the more elusive quarterbacks in the pocket in the NFL, you still don't need him running around and exerting more energy than he really needs to, because it's just unnecessary for your quarterback to be doing that when it's unwarranted. So I suspect they're going to make some big changes on the offensive side of the ball when it comes to play calling, and I think it's really going to work in Doug Baldwin's favor, and I really, really like him in cash games this week, and it would take something drastic for me to change my mind on that like I did last week. All right, so next up I have Keenan Allen, and first off, shout out to Greensboro, North Carolina. That's where a lot of my family is living currently, and that's where this guy's from. So obviously all of us are pulling for him. He's the hometown kid. But setting that aside, that's kind of irrelevant, because this guy would be a good play no matter where he's from. First off, Keenan Allen, if you're new to fantasy, or maybe you're just new to DFS and you didn't get to play him at all in 2016 because he got hurt in week 1, this guy in 2015 was like one of my go-tos in cash games. This guy is a PPR monster. He reminds me a lot of like a younger Larry Fitzgerald, because Keenan Allen is not a guy who's going to run past his defender, okay? I think like in 2013 or something like that, he actually posted like a 4.7 40 time. I don't think it was 100% to be fair. I think he ended up posting like a 4.5 or something at the actual combine or something like that. I can't remember. I think he actually might have been hurt. But regardless, the guy he doesn't have elite speed, okay? He just uses his size and his strength to create separation. So this guy is a PPR monster. he had 10 targets last week, and he was able to get 5 receptions for 35 yards. He did have a receiving touchdown, which definitely salvaged his day in terms of DraftKings points here at 14.5. And he has a much more favorable matchup going up against this Miami Dolphins secondary. They're going to be at home, and I think 10 targets is likely. In fact, I would be pretty much surprised if he doesn't get 10 targets again this week. So as long as Keenan Allen stays healthy, I think he's a lock for 7+ targets each and every week, and that's exactly what we're looking for in cash games, especially at this price. He's literally the same exact price as he was last week because he was slated on the Monday night game, so DraftKings already had the pricing out. So he probably would have been a little bit more had DraftKings not already released the pricing. So I like the price for him. I think he's a good play here, and I'm definitely going to be looking his way in cash games this week. All right, so moving into our tight ends and a defense. First up, I like Travis Kelce this week. The price doesn't seem outrageous at 5.1K. He has a really good projection this week at 18 points currently. Has a pretty good Vegas total right now at 26.5. So I like Kelce. I talked about it earlier with Kareem Hunt and how the Eagles last season were pretty serviceable in stopping the run game. So we can expect the Chiefs likely to try to move the ball through the air. They like to move the ball in short chunks. Usually, I think the Patriots game was a major outlier. I don't suspect that we're going to see the Chiefs continue to get massive chunk plays like they did in that game. So, look for Kelce to get more targets. Hopefully, he didn't have that good of a game against the Patriots, but I suspect he's going to have a much better one here. I also like Jared Cook. I can't believe I'm saying that. Jared Cook has burned me a ton in DFS for the past few seasons, occasionally off and on. I don't play him a ton, but every time I do, he's in a really good spot. He burns me, so I can't say that I'm going to be going all in on him. I'm going to take a chance on him in a couple of GPPs. Sorry about my phone going off there, but Jared Cook right here is a great way to get exposure to this game if you really want to pick on the New York Jets. But don't want to go all in on Amari Cooper with that extra price tag, or Michael Crabtree is pretty expensive this week. My phone's going off again. I apologize, but so I think Cook is I don't know. I don't even want to say he's a good play. He's an interesting and intriguing play at just 3,300. I'm going to give him a look. He had 5 targets last week. He caught all 5 of them for 56 yards. I don't suspect he's going to get many red zone targets, which is definitely a big knock against a tight end because that's where we want our tight ends to get the bulk of their work is in the red zone. So that's definitely worrisome there because, Crabtree, it looks like Cooper's even going to get more red zone work this season. And, of course, we have Seth Roberts who just comes in weird times and gets red zone looks for the Raiders for whatever reason the past few seasons. So if Cook can show out to be a red zone target, then he may have some value moving forward because he's actually pretty quick for a tight end, and he did have a couple of chances in that Titans game where he was completely free, running with completely open space around. So I like that. But Cook's not a guy I'm going to play in cash unless I really need to save at that position to pay up elsewhere. But yeah, so Cook's maybe a decent option in GPPs this week. All right, so for my defense, I have the Los Angeles Chargers, and I've just come to the realization that I basically like every single player on the Chargers this week for some reason, but I like their defense in this spot. Like I said, back at home again, I think it's a good bet that they're going to pick off Jay Cutler a couple times. I mean, it's Jay Cutler. I like the secondary with Jason Verrett and company. I like their front four with Joey Bosa. Very similar to Keenan Allen. I think their price would be different if they had not been in the Monday night game. So I feel like this is a very good price. So it's a good deal, and I like them a lot for not just cash games, but also for GPPs because I think this has a big potential for them to force a lot of turnovers in this game. All right, so that's going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to leave a like. Also, be sure to check out my video on Friday where I'll talk about some sleeper/value picks. As always, this Wednesday video is more oriented towards my cash game players and guys I'm looking to target in that type of contest. So I hope you enjoyed, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Later.